Bit of a generic statement really in terms of growth for our district really starts with industrial and business. That part of the district plan needs to really enable because without that the other FTAs like that we're talking about for residential, they don't really follow. So I couldn't really understate or overstate enough the importance of, in my opinion, of the industrial zoning and how much more that we might need than what is actually anticipated. In terms of this exact submission, Sonia can speak to it, but would just like to acknowledge and support the Section 42A recommendation that the existing consented site carry that underlying general industrial. That obviously makes sense. And I don't know whether it can be brought up for during the discussion, but even just the district planning map with the to provide that context of how the site sits relevant to the expansion zone to the south, and then the FDA. If it can't, you guys are probably reasonably familiar with.
Sorry, do we have tech support to make that happen?
Maybe Aaron, Megan come and support.
Is that able to be done, to have the planning map put up on the... Thank you for that. We do have the technology.
The only reason I think is it helps with that contextual look at the environment and just really understanding the coordinated pattern of development, which is obviously relevant. I'll probably at this point just hand over to Jason, bearing in mind time and things, so he can give a good rundown, and then we can, I'm available for questions, and similar to other consents, happy to jump in given that Sonia's come in at a late stage.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Jason Bray. I've been with Thomson Construction for 15 years, 25 years total in land, civil and building development in the Timaru area. The North Meadows site is 100% owned by Thomson Construction and Engineering. It was purchased in 2021, I guess with a very long-term view at the time, to secure future work for the company ultimately. There was a shift pretty shortly after that where we were looking to consolidate all of our existing business onto one site. We are a design build construction company and we fabricate our own steel and precast, so we have a rather large footprint requirement. We looked at alternate sites, but there was nothing available at the time. We needed in the order of 6 to 10 hectares to accommodate the business activities. So we then sought the resource consent for the operation on the North Meadows site. Our experience there was similar to many that we've encountered over the period post-earthquake through till 2020, roughly, where there was a lot of inquiry coming to the Timaru district, but we simply weren't ready or had sufficient land zoned and available and with a servicing pathway to take advantage of those opportunities. That inquiry level has tailed off I guess once we've got into the post-COVID honeymoon period. Once we've got beyond that, with market conditions decreasing, but we have over the 15 years of my involvement with the company seen a pretty decent uptake in the available land. That continues. So even Monday this week, we had a further building or a land use consent for a building for one of the sites here in Washdyke issued, and that's another 1.8 hectares of site that's now taken up with a consented development. So while there's been surges over the last period where there's been a peak of building activity at times and then a slight drop, even in relatively tight economic conditions, we're still seeing inquiry, we're still seeing land being taken up. There has been a slight shift in Washlake, and potentially we can the map to identify the areas, but there was a property zoned industrial that had been in the same hands for 37 years. That's recently changed hands, which I think from our perspective, it just demonstrates how long it can take sometimes for market conditions, those sort of things, to correct a shortage that may exist in available land. We construct predominantly through the Canterbury Bight, but down to Dunedin and northward as well. Through our touch points in the construction sector and our clients, we're seeing other districts continue to stay ahead of the curve with seeking to identify areas and satisfy the need almost before it arises, so that when those opportunities come along, they can capitalise on them. There was a 200 hectare development recently announced, or back in May, down at Melbourne, and then there's a Southern Link development at Mosgiel, which is another 60 hectares that is going to come on stream. 200 hectares with a projected $3 billion spend, that's a very long horizon line to spend that money. You know, that's got to be a 50-year plus horizon that development's looking at, which our experience has been that the horizon line that Timaru has perhaps had hasn't been long enough, and getting enough land available under a variety of ownership constraints to capitalise on those opportunities. The other thing that seems to be a common theme in both Rolleston and also on those two developments is proximity to port, which is something that Timaru can offer in spades. The other developments, you know, they're looking at providing rail links and other means of accessing port. But Timaru, from us, it's a construction company, but also as locals, having plenty of land available to market, and in our case, easy to service land, helps keep the industry going, provides the jobs and supports our port.
Thank you for that. Do you have questions?
Thank you, Mr. Bray. That's a very helpful background in terms of the rationale for the submission. I do have a couple of questions for you. So in relation to the existing land use consents, so I understand that that area is around 14 hectares, and that area, there looks to be agreement between the Section 42A officer and your advisors and yourself around that area. The balance is 16 hectares in the supporting information. I do note that Mr. Bonis has said that it's 19.7 hectares. Is there a reason? Are you able to talk to me about that potential discrepancy in the extent of the area? So correct. There's 14 hectares total, of which 10 hectares is owned by North Meadows, and that's our consented development that we're underway with. There's two 2-hectare properties on the corner of Meadows Road and Aorangi Road, different ownership, and they had consents in place prior to us. Of the balanced land, we've got 15.7 hectares shaded under 16.
Could you come and talk to the map? And
I can
If possible, tech-wise, could we get the land parcels up on screen?
They, barring the 10 hectares, which title hasn't issued yet, yeah, the rest of the boundaries are shown. So.
And the 16 balance that was talked about was
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
So I have that map in front of me, but maybe, Mr. Bonis, are you able to clarify how you arrived at 19.7 hectares?
Sure, and it was a bit laborious. So the submission's actually very broadly set. The submission covers the wastewater treatment plant as well, extends all the way down to there. So at my figure 40 probably carves it out reasonably well, but I set out, essentially starting at sort of 12.812. So looking at the submission in its broadest sense, I think it was something like 86 hectares. There was nothing in the submission package in terms of any material around that. The expert evidence from Mr. Kemp is that the wastewater treatment plant is covered by designation. It doesn't need a zone. I quickly excluded that area to save everybody some time in a rather lengthy report. And then I've identified at figure 40 the remaining area of the submission, excluding that area designated within the wastewater treatment plant within the plan, which incorporates, and that's part of their submission area. So my read area is the residual of their submission relief, and it identifies or separates between the yellow area, which is the 14 hectares, and the remaining part of their submission relief. It's the first I've heard today that the submission that they're still seeking is actually only the 16 hectare bit and not everything else.
Thank you. So figure 3 in one of the attachments does set out the 16 hectare area, but I take your point around clarifying the spatial extent, which we can do so. Thank you. So thank you. I think we've got to the bottom of that. That does seem clearer now to me. So, Mr. Bray, you mentioned that previously you had been looking around for other industrial land, and you mentioned that 6 to 10 hectares was kind of the range that you were looking at. And at that point you were unable to find land at that scale, and so you sought resource consents. So with the balance land that you're pursuing for industrial, is that still the case in terms of the size of land that you see as being sufficient? What exactly what is the functional need, I guess, of what your operational need of what you're looking for at this site?
Sure. So the 6 to 10, yes, is us. We have experienced a range of inquiry for land area, and it's tended to be on the larger size or larger scale. So one that I can speak to recently was a 4 hectare area requirement for an industry. Another one quite recently, which hasn't come to fruition, but they were looking for upwards of 9 hectares. So a specific land parcel area probably isn't an intended requirement for us going forward, because there has been a slight shift with TDHL since the period of our initial sort of looking for land. TDHL having 12 hectares on the corner of Airangi Road now. And then, like I say, the ownership shift of the 14 hectare parcel as well. So with that coming back on stream. But it's for us primarily having an excess of supply available to overcome some of those ownership constraints that do come up.
Thank you. And yesterday we heard from Mr. Heath, and this might be something that Ms. Dolan wants to address when we get to her. He was, in terms of the submission and the claim that there was insufficient land of a sufficient scale, he pointed out that in his research he had, there is provision for large industrial sites upwards of 9 hectares. He mentioned 13 hectares, 9 hectares, and half a dozen of smaller 2 hectare. So are you saying that for your need, that those available sites are not sufficient elsewhere within the district?
I think that it's the duration and so yes, there are available sites, and we have ownership of some of those. I guess this is having a slightly further horizon line for us.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all my questions of you, Mr. Bray. Thank you.
There's no further questions for Mr. Bray. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Page 7 of my statement of evidence, I want to reiterate that we do support the rezoning of the part of 236 Meadows Road, which we've alluded to before, which is the 14 hectares developed or consenting for industrial activities. But we seek that the balanced part of the 236 Meadows Road be either rezoned general industrial zone or to be rezoned future urban zone and the pathway for that to be zoned for general industrial purposes at a later time. I also want to alert to the matters that have been raised by Mr. Boners as far as the constraints. 2 matters being the infrastructure provision and the NPS HPL. Selwyn Chang, my colleague, will speak to his evidence later on. As far as the NPS HPL, I note that the client's 16 hectare balance lot is a mixture of class 2 and 3 soils, and due to timing we're unable to provide any supporting assessments as far as the NPS HPL. I do note that the adjoining 14 hectare consented activity had satisfied the pass all 3 tests of the HPL. Wanted to also alert to the property economics report and modelling that as far as the availability of sites, that is, to be able to carry this for the sort of activity that a client is seeking. We do believe that the other sites are neither service nor development ready or necessarily feasible to deliver in the short to medium term. I note that also the amount of vacant land for a wash dike has been allocated at 76.2 hectares. With that analysis, it's really hard to quantify how this vacant land is measured. There's no methodology for quantifying the metrics for whether the land demand is for the short, medium and long term. And then the other thing I've got to say is the benefits of the future urban zone for this allocation of this land can be subject to structure plan that could also incorporate further technical investigations. We understand that we may not get the general industrial zone for this balanced land because of the matters that raised by Mr. Bonus. However, we do think that the future urban zone would be a really good pathway as far as an alternative. The rationale behind the fuzz for industrial purposes can be driven by the need to unlock industrial capacity and meet the demand for industrial land should the district experience strong economic growth in the future. I do know other councils have done the same thing. They've actually allocated a future urban zone, such as Waipa District Council, and that land has then been rezoned for industrial land purposes at a later I won't speak too much about the infrastructure part because Mr Chang will be speaking to that. But we do believe that as far as the pathway, that this will be best suited for the site, namely because we've already had part of our submission supported by Mr Bonis as far as the rezoning. So it's just looking at having the balanced land following a very similar pathway as far as the outcome for the client. I have Mr Chang now speak to the infrastructure if there's any other questions from yourselves.
Thank you. The issues around the fuzz and the absence of a Section 32A has obviously been traversed this morning, so I won't ask any specific questions on those aspects. I am interested in terms of Mr Bonis's recommendation. He does make it quite clear that the recommendation for the balanced land primarily turns on an inability to give effect to the NPS HPL, and secondly, the resultant oversupply of zoned GIS land. So I guess what I'm interested in hearing from you, in the absence of any technical evidence on NPS HPL and any expert evidence from economic appraisal or economic assessment, how you're able to arrive at your view that it's in line with the statutory framework. I guess that's where I'm going.
Absolutely,
with
I understand. I think a lot to do with it is that we've got the land that's been had the developed consented for industrial activities. That obviously has the general rural zone, and the fact that it has been rezoned subsequently from the land use consent. I think it's just more that a nice tidy outcome would be to have the balanced land there for that purpose as well. I understand that there is those two things to be overcome: infrastructure provision, which Selwyn Chang will speak to, and obviously those things can be addressed. But for the time, in the essence of not having time, I was not able to bring that to the table for the NPS HPL.
Okay, thank you. One of the evidence areas that Mr Bonis's Section 42A report specifies is in terms of transport. Do we have any evidence available in the supporting package, or we don't have anyone appearing today in response to transport? Is that correct?
Glenn can talk to that.
No, I can probably answer that a little bit. So with the land use consent, there was a traffic impact assessment done for that site, and broadly speaking, there's upgrades required for Meadows Road that are already going to be to an industrial standard that were triggered as part of that consent. And then obviously with the expansion zone sitting to the south, that's already industrial in nature, and there'll be upgrades over time that would occur. So the anticipated receiving environment would be at a level that would be receptive to the activity that's being sought.
Right, thank you. And so that traffic impact assessment was for the purpose of a land use consent, correct?
Correct, yes.
So just so I'm clear, we don't have any transport evidence relating to the submission request today?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And your point in terms of the property economic stuff, if I just make a little bit of put a bit of context around that, because some of that discussion happened before Sonia's time. Some of the points that we raised and tried to get across in terms of the local context, and in particular Washdight, with South Canterbury being a food basket primary production area, the support for that rural sector and what's played out over the last 10 years has been those large footprint industrial sites. One of our concerns with the lens that property economics were looking through is that employment to floor ratio as a measure for looking at demand And in a lot of these large footprint buildings, in terms of direct jobs associated with that site, might be quite small. Arguably, they actually support wider than that when it comes to the rural sector. You might get additional truck drivers, you might get people working on farms, but in terms of employment associated with the individual sites, it can actually be quite low. And so that's one aspect. The other is that availability of land, and that's something that we still have a concern about in the Timaru context, because zone land doesn't equal available land, and for what I mean by that is that it can be strategically held by individuals or entities that that have their own growth expansion needs that aren't known to the community. Examples might be McCain's, DB Breweries. The way I understand it is that the only sites that have been taken out of the available capacity were Fonterra and maybe the Periora Meatworks. And so property economics still considers that those other sites should be in the mix. But quite clearly what we've seen over the last 20 odd years is that they're not available. And so I think that it is a relevant consideration that I can't speak to it as an economist, but fundamentally it's there, it's obvious. Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful background. Appreciate that. Thank you. Ms. Dolan, another question for you around the submission as sought also requested the application, the extension of the height-specific control area. So...
Is that in the further evidence that we brought in February? No, in the original submission?
I think it was, and I think that we highlighted that just as a potential anomaly, like why did it actually exist, and we're really wanting to point out, was it necessary in the context of the industrial environment, and I think because it stemmed from the airport, didn't it?
I've got a note here that the original submission sought to extend the SCA, the special control area, to the northern boundary, including the neighbouring land to the south, so as to enable built form to permitted height of 35 metres, rather than 15 metres height on the remainder of the GIZ. And Mr Bonis, I believe, has recommended that be rejected, not be supported. So I was interested in whether you're still pursuing that or whether you are accepting Mr Bonis's recommendation.
Yeah, we'll probably just let it lie with Mr Bonis's.
Okay.
That's good.
Thank you. And my only other question related to... and you may have already mentioned this in your introduction, so apologies if I'm asking you to repeat yourself, in terms of the merits of, or whether you have sought, whether you're pursuing any alternative consenting process for the balanced land.
Not at this stage. Yeah, the immediate need was that 10 hectares that's been obtained. It's really more a case that when you take a step back and you look at the framework and coordinated pattern of development, that it just made sense for us to take the opportunity and the forum to ask the question. That's the reason we're here.
Okay, thank you. No further questions of Ms Dolan from me. Thank you.
No further planning questions, but thank you. So, Mr Chang.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and the Commissioners. For the proposed site in Meadows Road, there is a water and sewer, low-pressure sewer has been installed recently this year in the extension of Linden Street to along Arangi Road. Most of these extensions are developer-funded, majority of that extensions. So there is no issue for that to be further extend towards that. The only restriction is because it's a rural urban zone. It requires approval from council to have some connections out of zone services. So there are a couple of lot size, including Thompson's 10 hectare, is currently rural zone, but now it's connected to the urban services. It's just to ease that plan. In addition, there's the Timaru wastewater treatment plant is very close by. The council is considering whether they do need to extend a trade waste line. That was the intention for the wash type industrial expansion zone to cater for wet industries. So to supplement and comment about Tifhurst on 10 hectares, where the big hectares is subject to where the location of this hectare. Usually wet industry does take a lot of area, and if there's a trade waste line that has been considered and funded by council through financial contribution, that proposed site could be opportunity for a wet industry and allow for that big land. So if you have a big land but no trade waste line, it become a big storage yard or something similar. While this land is located so close to wastewater treatment plant with a trade waste, this could enable some cost-effective between washed-out industrial expansion zone and the proposed site to have a reasonable low cost sharing due to a bigger number of contributors. In terms of stormwater management, the lot 10 hectare has already received a resource consent from ECAN for discharges to the ground and to the nearby flood protection drain. It will be a similar approach for the remaining site to obtain ECAN consent, and with a similar approach of consultation and process. So overall, most of those are developer funded, except for trade waste, because trade waste will be more like a public-wide benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. So we did hear from Mr. Kemp yesterday, and he provided an updated appraisal, if you like, in response to submitted evidence, and he hadn't reached a different opinion based on the assessments that you had provided. So it would be helpful for me if you were able to succinctly summarise the key difference between the key area of disagreement as it stands currently.
I'm not sure where his big lot size are. You just say a number. There's the number here, but I'm not sure where is it. It could be the one that is on the west side of Timaru. I'm not quite sure what FD is. It's the west side of Timaru after the railway. What I'm saying is because of the location where the water treatment plant is, there is currently the zone that is not identified as an industrial deferred zone in the district plan. That proposed site that the submitter has also could be a valid area to allow industrial, a general future urban zone or a general industrial zone.
I think you're referring to economy of scale.
Yeah.
That's right. So in terms of, my question related to Mr. Kemp in terms of the servicing.
Yep.
Yeah. So any kind of outstanding area of disagreement in terms of servicing.
Kemp. I thought it's team of Kemp.
Thank you. And in response to the evidence that you've provided to us in the submitter package,
yep.
What is the pressing issue that we need to consider?
There is no pressing issues. The only pressing issue is if that was to, currently it's rural zone. So any connection to be serviced for that rural zone will require council's authority. Where I can see the benefit is if council is to consider a trade waste line, that could be an economy of scale to include due to the site location for it, yeah.
As a wee bit more context, and maybe to help round that out, one of the issues when you're in someone like Kevin's position, needing to look at it, is it's not zoned, therefore looking at the LTP funding and then how it might be planned and sequenced just gets ignored because it's hypothetical, can't be considered. And I think that's really where the suggestion of an FUZ or similar mechanism provides that clarity, certainty, and with guardrails to allow for it to be more robustly thought of in infrastructure planning going forward. And then if you're looking at the context of where it sits, even relevant to sequencing and the potential for, is it FDA? I can't see, is it FDA 13? I can't. Yeah, if you're looking at how that might be potentially serviced in the future, Aorangi Road is a reasonable corridor to anticipate that trunk infrastructure might come down that path. And so rather than having development on only one side of the road, this provides an economy of scale that brings financial contributions potentially down, is what Selwyn was alluding to earlier. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr McLaughlin. That's a very helpful addition. Thank you. No further questions from me.
No, there's no further questions on that submitter. Thank you very much for that. And we'll move to your next submitter. There's Westgarth and Gibson.
If you don't mind, could we, the Westgarths aren't appearing in person and we've got Mr Aiken here.
Absolutely. You can swap them around. No problem.
I actually thought it was the other way around.
Is it Aiken first?
Yeah. Oh, no. Aiken's first. Thanks for accommodating that. Yeah, we can bring it from. Yeah, he does that. Thanks, Madam Chair and panel. Okay, I'll jump straight into the relief sought and then introduce Mr Aiken, who will speak from a landowner's perspective and also someone that's very involved with the community, both for Timaru and in particular Temuka. Overall, obviously, we were seeking to retain FDA 6, but really looking at removing the timeframe associated with that and the implementation of the FDA. The alternative relief was to amend its timing from 10 years to 5, and then grant any consequential relief as necessary, which the shift now might include consideration of the future urban zone with appropriate triggers. Yes, probably at this point I'll just let Gutsy take the floor and then I can dial back in like we have on others.
Yeah, thank you for today, team. My name's Gary Aiken, second generation businessman in Temuka since 1967. Proudly wear the black and white socks and we are very proud of our region. Just reiterating that we employ, just in Temuka alone, 180 staff. We're the largest contractor to Fonterra, being New Zealand's largest supplier of ingredients, I suppose, with 1,000 employees. So we have a very good relationship with the culture of Temuka, the business culture, but also of the wider South Canterbury region. What we've done is analysed that a lot of our staff, and no different to the transportation and logistics sector, we're going through an economic time where we've got to sit down and make sure we're sustainable in our our pattern. But what we're doing is we're finding we've actually got a further attraction of employees coming to us. They're travelling further, e.g. from Ashburton. We've got a couple of employees from Waimate, and we've actually got substantial employees from Geraldine, Pleasant Point and Timaru. What we're, after just analysing some of our local staff members, Temuka's not offering them what they need. And it's probably, it's not a high-end market, it's probably the lower-end housing that they can come into, and affordable three-bedroom home with families can set up and set up an environment and a culture. We are multicultural. We've got Arawhanua Marae right on our back doorstep, and we work very, very closely with those guys. And the substantial investment we want to throw at our town in the next probably 10 to 15 years is backed not only by iwi and ourselves, but a greater portion of investors in that region. So we're proud of what we've got. What I'm trying to say is we've got no different to other submissions that have come through here, to make sure that we've actually got the ground to do it. And we're not asking for a tick box today. We're sitting here saying, how do we actually create a pathway to make sure that we're actually recognised, and when it does come time to expand, that we can actually do it at a less complicated manner. And we call partnerships is like our middle name, and that's what we want with TDC and our consenting process. I've just been through a large consent process with ECAN, with a business of ours, Canterbury Environmental Solutions, and we've sourced to work with than against. And there's two different pathways. You can sit down and you can have consultants trying to take each other's heads off and be one better than each other, but we found that actually by bringing the teams together and working together gives you a hell of a lot more strength to deliver what the outcome needs to be. And the pathway we recognise through that is no different to what we're sitting here today. It's about working together as a team. So it's not about it's about what we can, we've got a parcel of land. The old fella's 90. He's not going to live forever and a day. God, I hope that's not live soon. It probably is. But we've got to secure Temuka's future and just make sure that his foresight is actually recognised later on through our generations below us. Thanks, team.
For them.
Thank you, Mr. Atkin. A couple of questions for you. With regards to Class 2 soils, can you elaborate on why the site's productive value is constrained to the point that urban development is a better use? Is that not for you? I thought you know your land.
Class 2 soils?
Why aren't you farming it? Why is it not a productive piece of land for farming purposes or anything? Why do you think that this piece of land can only be...
Predominantly towns grow to the north, and even though Temuka is built on swamp, it's still probably the best part of the land. Like if you go further east towards the coast, you're definitely wearing gumboots. And even to go to the west, to the Waitui area, you've got clay-based soils, which does not release the moisture as well. So there's a combination of just trying to pick the right spot. And I think with the trend, we've got a high score as a boundary. We've got access off two principal roads, being Seddon Street and Factory Road. We see it as an opportunity, but I'm quite keen for these questions because it's healthy to actually understand a different perspective on it.
That's good, and we plan to do a site visit too to familiarise ourselves, so that will be great. Just one further question. Do you anticipate any staging of infrastructure rollout to match development uptake? Because obviously that's a big part of this property economic report saying there's sufficient amounts, but with this particular development, do you see it as a staged approach, or do you think, roll out with the market demand, or do you see get in there?
I probably see it as a
What's your
staged, Stacey. I actually see supply and demand is always got to be met, and there's no sense oversupplying, because all you're doing is you've got a dormant, and it's no different to our main street with the empty shops. You need to make sure that you've got a balanced approach. I think it'll be more staged.
That just supports your request for moving it from that 10-year plus down to 5 to 10 years. That's significant, and it's, are you ready to roll this out and meet the demands of the market? And I suppose that's my question around that change that you're looking for.
It's interesting. That's a good question, because 5 years is what a lot of our business leaders around Temuka have actually sat around the table and identified as that's the point of change when Temuka needs to change. And that's not only for the investment in this block of land, this is actually in our main street. And the only way we can actually make Temuka sustainable is by having families, basically. We've got to have personnel to come up our main street and to fill some of those empty shops and actually rework our town. And this is not about I, this is about we as a community. So that's what I'm looking at.
If I could add to that, Stacey, that's the whole sort of rationale in a way about the future zone and or just the request initially to get rid of the 10 years was why have that block there if there's someone that's willing to work with council. And we're totally cognizant of the fact that there's still other matters too, like sequencing and infrastructure, but those things can be embedded in the requirements to overcome before that step. But it's really about we're going through this process of the district plan review, and it's an expensive exercise that takes years. District plans don't react well to demand when it's needed, so what can we put in place? So yeah, we're not necessarily asking for zoning straight away. We've listened and we're trying to find that happy medium.
Thank you. Next, Ms Dolan, are you next on the list?
Yeah, I'll bring in some fresh evidence here. Just wanted to allude the panel to sort of echo Mr McLaughlin and my client, that for the property economics report, interesting enough, Mr Heath has actually identified as Temuka being deficient in the residential capacity. So heavily reliant on the FTA. However, we don't have the FTA allocated. There will be actually, this is the basis of the average of the 450 square metres in that table. They actually will be under. It says minus 64 as far as the capacity. And obviously, I'm assuming that this FTAs will mean that that land will be unlocked and then change rezones over time. So it doesn't speak to timing and sequencing of when that would occur. The other matters that Mr Bonis raised in the report, we obviously have spoken to attach those in the evidence, the infrastructure, geotechnical report, outline, development plan, transport assessment will be, Mr Chang will bring his evidence in, and obviously we do acknowledge the NPS HPL matters. We understand that is something we've attached, obviously, from the agribusiness report assessment that has fleshed that out as far as we do say that we can overcome the particulars of the HPL. But as far as this site, we thought that the fuzz would be the way forward, and a lot to do with it is we've talked about, is just about having the ability to then rezone the land and not be constrained by a time frame as you already have with the FTA. Don't think there's anything else, but I wanted to make sure I don't want to reinvent the wheel and repeat myself.
Thank you.
Sort of following on from what you've just sort of read to us, you've proposed a future urban zone with structural planning to follow. Without current LTP funding for infrastructure, how can we be assured development would be timely and not speculative?
I'm just thinking Mr. Chang can probably speak to that a bit further.
We have a meeting. We did have a meeting with councils many months ago. Council has carried out their model, WSP model, Timaru and Temuka Growth Capacity Assessment. It did identify those areas, particularly Temuka, that no future growth can occur, particularly FTA 6, until upgrades has commenced. So it is. We did talk to Andrew Lester and Kevin Cam in terms of when is this upgrade occur. They did not give us a granular detail in terms of when. All they say is LTP is not funded. So that means what it means is we do need to have a communication with councils to ensure certainty for it. If this is not zoned, it's pretty much unlikely council will just ignore, more like ignore, this is FTA, we will not invest any infrastructure there, and then those upgrades that is identified in the WSP report that council has undertaken may be undersized or may misallocate the fund in an appropriate area. So what it triggers is certainty for council. To answer your question, it's not simple, it's to have more communication to ensure that there is a zone that is going to be a future urban zone, ensuring councils may have time, which is, I agree on staging methods, to renew those identified types that is identified by WSP report to upgrade at a appropriate size to cater for that future, to cater for that number of future urban zone area. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Stacey. So that means if that is to program, so that means it could allow council to have to create a structural funding or financial contribution to cover those growth upgrades requirement.
I've just got one question, and it's possibly one actually that Mr. McLaughlin might need to answer, but you may know. It's just in the attached documents, that agribusiness report. I'd just like to know who wrote it. And the reason I'm asking is that it is a generic report from agribusiness, and then it uses the terms I within the report. So I'd just like to know, and the same question is going to arise with the next submitter. Yeah. I'd just like to know who was the author, that's all.
I believe Anne Moriarty.
Yeah.
Yeah, overseen by Stuart Ford, written by Anne Moriarty. I believe, yeah. We can come back to you to confirm that 100%, but that's our understanding.
It would be useful if you could do that, and we'll have it in writing. Thanks.
Yep.
No other planning questions. So was there anything else, Mr. Chang, that you wanted to add from your report?
Not much from my report. I think I've answered the one that Stacey just asked.
And I think you answered it, but I'll just because I wrote it down, I'm going to ask you. So it was around some of the modelling reports that came in, and I just wondered, has any modelling or preliminary design been done to confirm whether the proposed stormwater management system can meet TDC or ECAN's flood level requirements? Because there was a lot about the, the flood levels on the site, so I just wondered if anything's been done.
No modelling has been done. It's more on the surface, looking at the contour of the area, top of surface, where's the low-lying area and where's the close by stream that it can be discharged. So in the FDAs, I think we provide the outline development plan where the stormwater management area will be likely to be addressed. We have provided a quite a significant portion of land to allow attenuation and treatment to make sure there is quite a commitment of land that could meet the Canterbury Land and Water Regional Plan requirement. So all design will still meet the Canterbury Land and Water Regional Plan so that it can align with the Council's Stormwater Management Plan, Council Temuka Stormwater Management Plan when that has been approved for that year.
Thank you. So there's no further questions in relation to that submitted package, so thank you very much for your evidence. No, you're all good?
Thank you.
So do we want to deal with the Westgraf Gibson submission now? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and panel again. Right, moving to Westgarth Gibson, submitted 227, which relates to FTA 1 and 4, currently general rural zone with an FDI overlay. The relief obviously was that we immediate rezoning of the southern portion of FTA 1 to general residential, or now considering FUZ, and the FDA boundary alignment and bringing FDA 4 forward or removing the time frame. So today I'm representing Rosa Westgarth and Jan Gibson, the landowners at 82 Clellons Hill Road. Through successive family ownership, they've owned and farmed the property for more than 130 years. While they're farmers and not developers, they're committed to seeing the site used efficiently and responsibly for residential development that aligns with both community needs and smart infrastructure planning. I'll jump through some of my notes because they're a little bit generic and we've covered some of those. Probably some of the key points to emphasise. The site has already been recognised for growth. It's been identified through the FDA 1 and 4 overlays and the past council strategies, the GMS 2022. It's adjacent the existing urban environment and has proximity to services and roads, with a caveat there on services that the way the gravity falls is it does need that neighbouring site on the downhill side to help work. The boundary realignment with the FDAs was logical, and that's been supported, and we're thankful and agree with that. However, we do still request that that there's a consideration on that on the FDA framework. Council have already initiated that development area plan process, and that's partly due to the fragmentation of all of these sites. So there's FDA 1, 2 and 4. So in a sense, the development or the DAP is already partly there in meeting that immediate zoning consideration. I will acknowledge that that's pretty fresh and still hasn't gone through stakeholder engagement, and that includes landowner and other stakeholders. But it is there, and it was provided as supporting evidence. Similar to the others, we commented on the property economics And I would make mention, because we haven't actually touched on it previously, that it was only yesterday when Mr Heath clarified about that average consideration. And so a lot of our evidence up to that point was on the assumption that he had used 450 across the board. However, as Sonia had alluded to earlier, I don't think he actually clarified the FDA element in terms of what he acknowledged what the existing urban assessment was, but the FDA element was different. And I think what actually came out of looking at a wee bit of the DAP information is the challenging nature of some of the area, like the topography and actually being able to achieve the yield. And I think, like, to me, that actually just highlights why there's theoretical supply or capacity, but actual supply and capacity can be heavily influenced by other matters. I believe that the HPL aspect, because it was identified in the plan, that LIM has been met, and the underlying is LUC3. So guidance indicating that National's looking to get rid of that. I know that that's hasn't happened yet, but it's relevant. So I'll probably leave it there, and then Sonia and Selwyn, and then I'll just dial in and cover off what I can.
Thank you, that's great. Yep. Ms Dolan.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, for this particular submitter, first of all, we want to acknowledge and thank you for the support for the boundary requirements FDA 1, FDA 4. We are still, obviously, with like all the other submissions, feel like the FDA be replaced with a different planning framework for the VUS. Going forward for this particular site, or these sites, I want to allude you to the dwelling capacity requirements on page 6, that actually out of all the settlements throughout the Timaru district, Timaru's capacity is one where we have the most deficiency. So without the FTA being allocated, there would be a significant risk as far as not having ample enough residential land for housing yield going forward. I can see actually it says it's minus 465. So heavy reliance on those FDAs to be incorporated as far as allocation for future development areas, and then obviously for the zoning change at a later date. And the reason why we're obviously still going through the votes, as we've alluded to with the other submissions, is to do with the time frame. So this can be, the FUS can be more responsive than the FDA process. And I think Mr McLaughlin's actually covered off a lot of other things, and the other thing that we have is other matters that have been incorporated will be the infrastructure particulars, and Mr Chan can speak to those things as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Dolan. I'd like to get, I guess at this point, many of the issues have already been traversed, so I don't wish to go over those. I think we've got a good understanding of where things are sitting in terms of what you're seeking for the FUS, and obviously we're going to be getting a Section 32 from you. So my understanding at this point is that the FDA 1, FDA 4 boundary interface, there's now agreement between the Section 42A and yourselves, and noting that we did receive Ms Pfluger's advice based on the receipt of the contour information yesterday, so I think I'm across that And then, so the outstanding component, we will be receiving further information from you in the form of Section 32A assessment. In terms of your evidence, at paragraph 33, I had a point of clarification for you. You're talking there about Objective 6 of the proposed district plan. Is that accurate, or are you intending to refer to the NPSUD there?
I think I've quoted that from what Mr. Bonus's report. At some point I've quoted, I was just thinking, sorry, but just to clarify.
I have looked through Mr.
Yeah, no,
Bonus's
that's all
report
good.
and
I got that from
find it.
decisions on urban development that affect even. It might be actually where I've gone as far as how we get allocation of funding with the LTP and whether that's referred to. So I'm sorry, I can't actually answer that at this point, but yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's all, I think it might have been from an original report talking about infrastructure provision when you're actually looking, investigating, it could be from the growth management strategy. It could be from that's quoted from, and then yeah, so there might have been a bit of a crossover there.
So because I was curious about this statement, I did look back at Mr. Bonus's report, and I've also looked at the proposed district plan, and it didn't align with the phrasing there. So I think what's happened is that you're actually referring to the NPSUD. Bonus, does that wording there correspond to your understanding of?
It's the exact wording of the NPSUD.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Could you just please confirm that for us in writing following the hearing?
Yeah, no problem.
And also whether that has any bearing on your assessment and the conclusions that you're reaching, if you've been interpreting something that isn't what you're saying you're interpreting?
Yeah, I'll clarify exactly where I got it from.
Great.
No problem.
Thank you. And Commissioner White clarified the author of the agribusiness report, so that deals with that question. And I think that brings me to the conclusion of any of my questions. Thank you.
Right, no further questions from me, so Mr. Chang, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This site is one of the prime example how priorities of long-term plan infrastructure works. So in terms of like water, council have recently installed a large water main connecting from Morgan's Road that goes through Morgan's Road and Callan's Hill that connects to Wash Dyke zone. The WSP model report has allowed the pipe size to have allowed FTA to size the pipe accordingly. In the growth management strategy, this has been identified as FTAs, but not much upgrade has been carried out until Wash Dyke requires a higher level of service for firefighting requirement, and that triggers the water main upgrade to take in. So what does the FUZ will do is to actually enable councils with that certainty again, that there's a growth, and to time the project or sequencing the project at stage when it's able to accommodate. So what I'm saying is WSP have done the Timaru wastewater and water report. The upgrades has been identified, required to be has been identified. It's just the timing of these upgrades need to be more communicated between the developers and council to ensure what is feasible and practical for the staging of the works to be allowed. Priority only comes in when there is something to trigger it, and I believe the FUZ will trigger those priorities. Whether it will prioritize council's work, it's not about that. It's more on giving council more information where to allocate their investment accordingly in a more beneficial way for the whole community-wide, e.g., including infill development. In terms of funding, that means it will allow time for council to create any financial contribution or development contribution to fund the upgrade costs required within their council network, and any extension of the network from the development will be largely developers' expenses. But I also note that the stormwater management procedure report did identify, including WSP report, did identify there is some public benefit to mitigate flooding for the downstream in Taitariki Creek. If council wish to work with the developer in regards of how much land is required to be committed to assist or to mitigate the flooding issues on that. So one example is servicing is all right. Servicing for water is they have installed a clearance water main, so that is meeting the WSP report in terms of capacity. In sewer, wastewater, we will need further communication with council to ensure what is feasible for it. Worst come to worst is a public centralized pump, but that is not the cost-effective way because it is quite a large development with a lot of sites that we need to find a better approach. But there is always a feasible option to carry out stage development. That's pretty much it.
Oh, thank you for that.
Sorry, Madam Chair. I'm sorry to interrupt. Mr. Bonas has just, before Mr. McLaughlin and Ms. Dolan leave, raised with me a potential misunderstanding around Mr. Heath's evidence, and I just thought it might be worth clarifying that before they leave. Yeah.
Thank you, and an unusual suggestion, but I just wanted to clarify a couple of matters before we carry on. There seems to be some suggestion that there's an error in Mr. Heath's evidence included in the preliminary report around the capacity assessment and the sort of misunderstanding around a 450 metre average. What Mr. Heath was referring to as an error was in a summary response in evidence that we didn't provide to the panel. So the error he was correcting was in a summary that the panel has not seen. So there is no mistake within or error within the evidence that was provided in the preliminary report or the capacity analysis. In fact, Mr. Heath makes it clear within the preliminary analysis at section 2.2 key assumptions that for the purpose of the modelling they've stuck to a 450 square minimum site size, and then later on in the realisable he identifies quite clearly that they didn't I'll just read it out. Although there is likely to be some sites which do build down to a lower density, this conservative assumption reflects a possible market scenario where the majority of demand for the higher density housing is accommodated in the medium density residential zone, and the general residential zone is limited to 450 square metres or larger sites per dwelling. What we asked Mr. Heath to respond to was the evidence of Ms. Dolan identifying that it was a 450 metre average within the capacity analysis. There never was, and it was explicitly made clear in the statements that I've read out. He provided us with a summary to that evidence saying we might have, we'll have a look at it, which is one of the reasons we didn't provide it. He clearly wasn't aware that we didn't provide those summaries through to the panel, and he was correcting that error by saying actually the average that we've looked to is different for each settlement, and I believe in Timaru it was something like 573. But we will get him to categorise all of that. I just wanted to make it categorically clear for the panel there is no minimum, there is no average 450.
Because I had understood that he was correcting an error in his primary report. But that just begs the question, if he assumed that we had some summary report that we didn't, what did he not tell us yesterday that he assumed we'd read? Or others had read?
He just read through what the rest of the summary was, but we'll provide that full version through to you.
Thank you.
As amended.
Thank you for that.
Sorry about that.
That's helpful. Right, well, thank you. Thank you, Mr McLaughlin, and your team, and Ms Roycroft for your presentations and coordination of the evidence for your submitters. As indicated, we are going to do some site visits, so we'll familiarise ourselves with the location. And post-hearing, for your benefit, Ms Dolan, the panel generally issues a minute with some questions or directions to expert witnesses to do some homework. And on that list will be requesting you to undertake a Section 32 evaluation for the submitters you've represented at this hearing. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time.
I want to find yes. So finally, we do get to the pains, and thank you very, very much for your perseverance. We're just going to take a 5-minute comfort stop, and then we will deal with your submission. No, we have enough. If we're right with the break, look, we'll just take a short break now, and then we'll deal with you before we break for lunch.
is more human than technical. We're asking the panel to recognise the very real impacts of planning decisions on people's lives and to consider how the district plan might offer a way forward. Pelvey Orchard has now become inoperable, not due to the neglect or my parents being poor business people, but because of lifestyle subdivision enabled under the operative district plan. The pressure from surrounding lifestyle development and the changing context and associated expectations on primary production has made basic orchard operations, spraying, using machinery, managing bird strike, untenable. Recognising this, my parents have engaged constructively with the district plan review process, trying to ensure a viable future for that area and also their land. That future is no longer in orcharding, where over the last 3 decades, TDC have increasingly set the scene in terms of the lifestyle use surrounding the area, and orcharding has become out of step with this. Mum and Dad have stood fighting to earn a living as the final remnant of productive land use in an area now shaped by lifestyle development. When the draft plan was notified in 2020, it proposed a rural lifestyle zone on part of the main North Road, Bennett Road, Temple Street area. In good faith, we made a submission seeking that the entire block be zoned rural lifestyle, given the degree of existing fragmentation and surrounding development. Then, silence. For 2 years, we heard nothing, yet in the background, council staff and consultants were redrawing the lines. No one came to speak with the people directly affected. No one came to walk the land and see how rural production had already been undermined in this area. Instead, we became pawns on a chessboard, moved to fit an abstract planning ideology disconnected from reality. When the proposed plan was finally notified in 2022, it came as a bolt up from the blue. The entire block continued to be zoned general rural use zone and identified as a future development area for potential rural lifestyle zoning in 10 years or more, maybe, and only after a development plan area and plan change process triggered under council's discretion and timeframes. Our family was stuck, too compromised to farm, too large to be a lifestyle property, too soon to hope. The human cost and stress of this process has been immense for my family. It is distressing to see how theoretical lines on paper can distort people's lives and futures. We are here today asking that the errors of TDT's past planning decisions be recognised and addressed, that the damage caused by inertia and opaque planning decisions be, to the extent possible, repaired. This is about more than zoning categories. It is about fairness, dignity, and the ability for a family to move on with their lives. In that spirit, I want to highlight a number of serious concerns with the evidential foundation and procedural integrity of the plan review process. My first matter relates to the flawed growth metrics and the burden of proof. You've already heard from Mr. Shirtcliffe and Mrs. Lee Burden yesterday about the deficiencies in the growth metrics provided by property economics. These flawed metrics underpin the recommendations of Mr. Bonis in the Section 42A report, particularly around rezoning provisions and timing in Geraldine. I'd like to note that the Geraldine Housing and Land Availability Report has been appended at the end of Ms. Worf's evidence and uploaded to TDC's website rather than being uploaded as a separate document. This may mean that it has unfortunately been missed by the Commissioners and other submitters. I hope, or we hope, that it adds further perspective for the Commissioner's consideration. To provide some context, the community survey and research report that Ms. Worf and I undertook on behalf of Geraldine NZ was sparked by a conversation at our dining table with Mayor Bond. He shared that Mr. Simon Coleman, the former principal of Geraldine High School, had been struggling to recruit and retain staff due to the lack of available land and housing in Geraldine. I'd also like to acknowledge the immediate past chair of Geraldine.nz. I'm not sure, unfortunately due to scheduling, I'm not sure she's arrived yet, but Mrs. Frances Coles, Geraldine.nz sponsored this assessment, and the organisation values the effort that has gone into what she said is finally quantifying an issue that the local businesses they represent face. The issue of land availability for Geraldine was further reinforced in December 2024 when Mr. Bonis and Mr. Hackart visited our property. At that meeting, Mr. Bonis stated, "There's no demand for land in Geraldine and no lollies in the lolly scramble." In other words, there was no infrastructure provisioning or plan to accommodate future growth, which many Geraldinians would argue is already well out of step in our town due to TDC's prolonged underinvestment in Geraldine. As someone with a PhD in planning inequities and deep familiarity with the literature, I recognise Mr. Bonis's statement as an unreasonable justification for council inaction. No demand is often used to mask a situation where constrained supply and poor infrastructure phasing create the illusion of no demand. As a family, we've invested heavily and worked tirelessly to provide a credible evidence base for our position and the changes we have sought. But this evidentiary burden must cut both ways. As a community and a district, we should be able to rely on the credibility of the growth metrics informing the proposed Timaru District Plan. But we cannot. Those metrics are riddled with gaps and untested assumptions. Once again, the same consultants are used that have been used for over the past decade, perpetuating blind spots without independent critique or external third-party validation of the numbers and assumptions. As Councillor Vela has argued, submitters must carry the evidentiary burden to justify any changes to the proposed Timaru District Plan, which is deeply problematic. It should not fall on communities or lay people like my parents to disprove the fundamental foundations of the statutory plan review. We are entitled to trust the integrity of the data and analysis prepared by those who hold the statutory responsibility to get it right. This is textbook, expert and legal capture. It actively excludes and silences community voices who don't have the resources to represent. As Professor David Harvey, who spent much of his academic career at Oxford University, and many other scholars in critical planning and urban theory have shown, institutions often perpetuate neoliberal inequalities through hidden mechanisms of exclusion, laws, rules, and processes that appear neutral but are anything but. This process at times has appeared to be a case in point. My second matter relates to ECAN's evidence and procedural fairness. We'd like to raise serious concerns about the role and timing of ECAN's involvement in these hearing proceedings. Given the close caucusing and working relationship between TDC and ECAN throughout this process, we are troubled that ECAN's evidence requested by Mr. Bonis to support the Section 42A report was not provided alongside other expert evidence several weeks ago. Instead, it has arrived late in the hearings, construed as if ECAN are independent submitters and as a series of curveball new issues that were not canvassed in ECAN's original submission or further submission. Responding to these is challenging given the lack of notice or time. Does the scope test not apply to ECAN as it does to other submitters? Commissioner Mackay rightly observed yesterday that some of the hail and groundwater concerns seemed specific. From our perspective, these issues appear to be directly targeted at our site. They've been introduced late in the process, creating yet more hurdles for us to overcome, despite being matters that would typically be addressed through a well-structured consenting process. In our view, they are red herring matters, not legitimate grounds for rejecting our proposal at this stage. At this late stage, it seems deeply unfair. It also seems inconsistent with natural justice, one of the bedrocks of New Zealand's land planning systems. My third and final matter relates to factual errors in expert reports. I'd like to highlight the number of factual inaccuracies and oversights within expert reports. Ms. Wolf will speak to these in more detail. While these appear to be small errors, they reflect a broader lack of rigour in the technical assessments underpinning this plan, which have substantive consequences for local people and our communities. We thank you for your time and your attention to what is at stake. We trust that the panel will give our case its fullest consideration, not just on its evidentiary merit, but with an appreciation of the real consequences of your decisions. At this point, I will pass over to Ms. Wharf to address her evidence. Then Mum, Sue, will provide some brief closing remarks. Finally, we'd really like to extend an invitation to the Commissioners to undertake a site visit. We feel that it's important that you understand the area we are speaking to and are deciding the future of. In the meantime, to assist the Commissioner's understanding of the area, I'd just like to speak to a map setting out the context. So I apologise, I actually PDF'd an earlier version, so the caption is not right. But as you can see, it's a GIS, very high level concept plan, basically using 1.4 hectare across the area. Very inclined to like five sections, 102 hectares that are access of
7. Oh,
which is I'd also like to recognise Rough the Stream that runs south. Basically, this used to be a previous water race led by here on the road, which meant the water coming into the stream would be degraded. That subsequently finished. The Springfield stream that is rough runs clean. And where we have access, you can see the Esplanade strip, just along here. We've been extensively removing flows. Also, I'll note is the existing bore, which my understanding is the only one in the block, which is relevant to Ms. Wharf's choosing. I'd also like to highlight the pink dots. So they are 5 blocks that were recently subdivided under the Auckland District Plan, and they average around 6,000. We need an enablement approach. We also note that Mr. Bruce Selby, Submitted 32, is this block here, backing onto Waiheke River, and Scott's Mount, or section of EPA3 for a future residential. And also note, Geraldine residential zone begins at Temple Street here. So it's a hard kind of zoning boundary between the residential, what is considered general rural currently. So with that, I'll pass over to the next.
So I prepared a summary statement because I felt that the ECAN matters needed to be addressed. So thank you for the opportunity to address the hearing today on behalf of the Paynes. And thank you also for the extension granted for my evidence due to health issues, and this was much appreciated. I was still spinning with vertigo while I wrote it. So I'm saying that it may be that the circumstances have meant that there may be matters in my evidence that you may have questions to clarify, and I'm happy to do that and understand why. Paragraph 1.5, this summary addresses matters that have arisen in the 42A summary report and the evidence of ECAN, especially regarding contaminated land and wastewater management. The submitted package was presented and in response to the preliminary report. The Section 42A report has assessed that package and is recommending that the plan be amended with the following changes in terms of FDA 11. And I've set out there the reasons that the Section 42A presented for that. To paragraph 1.9, I support the recommendations to amend the PDP to remove FDA 11 from Schedule 15 and rezone it as rural lifestyle zone. I also support the recommendation to remove the versatile soils overlay from the FDA 11 area, and part of the submitted package was a report from Stuart Ford from Agribusiness Group, which Mr Bonas has accepted and referred to in his Section 42A report. In particular, I support the removal as an FDA, as I do not consider that an area of 38 titles, many of which are small and fragmented, which have no potential for future development, is an appropriate candidate for a DAP approach. And I've talked to a number of planners about that. DAP processes or structure plans are more suited to greenfields development type scenarios in areas where there's limited number of landowners who are seeking development, such as the FDA 3 area of the Scots, which is adjoining this property. However, I do not support the recommendation of a minimum lot size area of 2 hectares as a special control area in the FDA 11 area, and I'll address this more below. Attached to my evidence is the report Housing Availability and Land Supply, an evidence-based assessment of Geraldine, South Canterbury. This report has been undertaken this year to determine the need for housing and land supply in Geraldine, as the data presented by TDC did not seem to align with the local lived experience in Geraldine. The survey data collected showed a number of responses. That 72% of respondents considered there's insufficient residential land in Geraldine, 68% considered there's inadequate rural lifestyle section availability, 60% stated that the lack of land and housing availability had impacted their ability to operate or grow a business or community organisation. 88% of respondents considered that housing and land constraints are undermining Geraldine's ability to attract and retain residents and workers, with 58% considering that to be significant. The Property Economics Report considers there's sufficient land zone for growth in Geraldine. Given the findings of the Housing Availability and Land Supply Report, it's contended that greater land supply should be provided in Geraldine and the PDP with an immediate time frame, not deferred into the future. It's important to note, and this arises from yesterday, that the demand for worker accommodation is for permanent workers, not seasonal workers. Many of these workers are professional people, vets, engineers, teachers. Therefore, the type of accommodation required is permanent housing. In addition, the PE report is based on a yield of 96 lots in FDA 11, based on a 5,000 square metre lot size. But the Section 42A report is recommending only 6 new lots in addition to the existing 38, providing basically 44 lots, somewhat short of the 96 that was in the original Property Economics Report. And this deficit does not appear to have been considered in the recommendations to provide growth in Geraldine, let alone the local demand that's been identified by a number of submitters. The 2 hectare minimum lot size. The point of contention between Mr Bonas and myself relates to what should be the minimum lot size for the FDA 11 area. And the Section 42A recommendation to impose a SCA of 2 hectares on the FDA 11 area is predicated on the basis that the proposed plan in sub S14 has a 2 hectare lot size, unless there is a sewer connection to each residential lot. I consider that a minimum lot size of 1.5 would be appropriate for the FDA 11 area. A 1.5 minimum lot size for FDA, and I put a caveat on this, is where the access is not on to State Highway 79, and it would provide a yield of 10 lots compared to 6 lots under the 2 hectare scenario. And I've deliberately left out the lots that are 3 hectares, but they go on to State Highway 79 based on the transport report. So it would be in essence, the yield of a 1.5 compared to a 2 hectare minimum is only an additional 4 lots, which I don't and the overall extent of lot increase is not significant, yet a 1.5 hectare minimum lot size provides more flexibility to develop lots in a manner more sensitive to land contours and design, enabling more efficient use of the land. The matter of the 2 hectare minimum lot was traversed at the subdivision hearing. My evidence for that hearing found that the 2 hectare requirement was not supported by the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement, Timaru Growth Strategy, or the Section 32 report for subdivision. While matters have been addressed in respective hearings, the various provisions need to be considered in an integrated manner. 210, I have not found the evidential basis that Council is relying on for the establishment of the 2 hectare minimum lot for rural lifestyle in sub S14, where there's no wastewater reticulation. And we've done considerable diving into minutes and reports and requested various things and have been unable to find that. It's difficult to address this matter where the original rationale for the council decision is not clear. Despite this lack of articulation of the evidential basis, I've assessed the effects of a 1.5 hectare based on the Section 42A report and the expert reports attached to Mr Bonis's report. Mr Bonis considers that the 1.5 hectare density would likely create conflict with the application of sub S14. It does not refer to sub P15, which provides for RLZ subdivision by providing a suitable site for on-site disposal with no area stipulated. I consider that sub S14 conflicts with sub P15 and that the rule and standard should implement the policy direction in policy 15. There are currently conflicts across the plan in respect to the provision of wastewater in the RLZ, which is subject to submission and evidence, and those various conflicts. In terms of responding to the various expert reports, Ms Pluger considers that a lot size of 1.5 to 2 hectares would be appropriate in this area. The transport report of Mr Collins considers the effect of FDA 11 area are localised and effects are minor. An additional 40 vehicle movements per day from the additional 4 lots would be generated, being a total of an additional 100 vehicles per day from the FDA 11, which is less than the 40 vehicles per hour that the report uses as a benchmark. And as I said, I have specifically sought that the 1.5 hectare minimum lot only apply where the access is not onto State Highway 79 to avoid additional impacts on the State Highway. The economic memorandum of Mr Heath does not consider that the additional yield of up to 6 lotments would move the dial in terms of sufficiency. In my opinion, the same rationale could apply if the potential number of lots was an additional 4, a total of 10 from the FDA 11 area. In terms of the cultural heritage report, the report on Ms Hall regarding Manua Whenua matters actually considers 22 Templar Street, which is FDA 3, and 20 Bennett Road, FDA 11, in the same section. However, FDA 3 is for residential zoning with between 110 to 130 lots, while FDA is for rural lifestyle. Despite this difference, the report comes to the same conclusions for both FDAs, even though the effects of the development would be inherently different. Ms Hall would like to see the existing council reticulated infrastructure extended to accommodate the future density to ensure that stormwater and wastewater do not degrade Waihi River and Raukapuko stream further. Such a request is certainly relevant to FDA 3 and the residential development. In response to Ms Hall, Mr Bonis states in respect of FDA 3 that subject to reticulation and appropriate storm management stormwater management through the subdivision process and associated regional consents, a rezoning would therefore uphold cultural values. But he does not seem to have reached the same conclusion in terms of FDA 11. In my evidence in chief, I respond to Ms Hall's report and note that Tahu values would be considered in both the regional council and district council processes through the resource consent process. Water supply, as noted in my evidence in chief, the area would be serviced by Timona water supply, and we've had it actually confirmed from Mr Kemp that there would be sufficient water to service the additional lots. As identified in my evidence in chief, management of stormwater would be subject to a consent from ECAN and a design developed to reflect the configuration of lots in any proposed development, be it 6 or 10 lots. Wastewater. I've addressed provision of on-site wastewater management in my evidence in chief and also in respect of ECAN's evidence below. It's my contention that any development would need to ensure that appropriate on-site wastewater management systems could be developed. I do not consider the difference between 6 or 10 lots to be significant because the design could only include the number of lots for which sufficient capacity could be developed. And I've listed there some of the provisions that I think that the 1.5 hectare minimum lot size would meet in terms of the policy framework of the plan and also the RPS. If I turn over the page to Environment Canterbury's evidence, they've filed evidence that's specific to the Paynes property and submission. It's the only property that the ECAN's evidence addresses. ECAN's submission on the FDA was general in nature and did not address specific sites. They did not make any further submission on FDA 11, but has subsequently filed evidence in that regard. And it would appear that it's been written in response to a request from the Section 42A report. And as Mr. Payne has said, Dr. Payne has said, we consider it should have been actually attached to the 42A report. Anyway, I'll address the contaminated land issue, and maybe we can bring up the next slide because this is the one that oh, right. This is the map that was actually contained in Mr. Massey's evidence, and I'll refer to it as I go through. I just wanted to make sure it would come up. So the National Environment Standard for assessing and managing contaminants in soil to protect human health applies to any development that is undertaken. The District Council is responsible for implementing the NESCS through the resource consent process. The Regional Council is responsible for identifying contaminant land or potentially contaminated land based on the hazardous activities and industries, the HAIL list. Such land is then listed in the LLUR, and this is what these identified areas are here. Clause 5 of the NESCS identifies subdivision as an activity to which the NES applies, and as orcharding has been undertaken on the land and is identified as a HAIL activity, the NES would require that any investigation be undertaken on the FDA land as part of the subdivision application. The PDP has a specific chapter in the hazards and risks section on contaminated land that sets out the policy framework and relies on the rules in the NES. Subdivision R3, that's a subdivision rule that would apply if this land was to be subdivided, has a matter of discretion requiring consideration of measures to avoid, remedy or mitigate adverse effects of any natural hazard or other risks, and also the suitability of the future development that would be enabled as a result of subdivision. And the outcomes and recommendations of such an investigation would be part of a subdivision application. This is the process that happens whenever a subdivision is undertaken on land listed as Hale and would be recognised as part of the development and consenting process. The evidence of Mr Massey identified 4 sites, and he had this map and some numbers, and we didn't know which related to which, but I've gone through and I've identified the different LLUR numbers. So maybe I'll just speak to it just so you're aware. This lot here is the Kane's property. Lot going out to the side is a lot that they'd subdivided previously. This is one where there has been an investigation in 2000, as you referred to, and these sites here were previously orchards under a different ownership. Mr Massey said that these sites were identified through historical aerial imagery taken from the 60s and 70s, but there's been no investigations apart from the site at 107 Templar Street. The Paynes subdivided the land at 11 North Road in 2003, and that's the lot going out to the side. Prior to the NES, which was 2011, and they had soil tests done pre-sale in case such results were requested at the time. While some residues were detected, they were at low level, and the report determined that they were not in any way dangerous to humans or food for consumption processed on that land. The report concluded that the parcel of land was all clear to have residential housing without any potential threats to occupiers. I understand that this parcel of land was the oldest area of orchard in the FDA block and would have had the greatest exposure to the use of persistent pesticides, which have been ceased to be used since around 1980. Some areas within the orchard at 20 Bennett Road were planted in orchard mid-90s, and some of the titles never been planted in orchard, so the potential for contamination on those sites is limited. Due to the demands of the integrated fruit production system, the level of agrochemical use in the orchard has only been as required, has been subject to careful monitoring, and also met industry and export market guidelines. No nitrogen has been used on the orchard. The 2013 investigation at 107 Templar Street has been categorised by ECAN as verified non-hail. The orcharding on this block was similar to what has taken place on the adjacent block south of 20 Bennett Road. This history, along with the 2003 test results, suggests that no issues of concern would be found at 20 Bennett Road, which in any case would be subject to investigation at the time of subdivision and development. I consider that this is not a relevant matter for the rezoning hearing, or a matter that should preclude a rezoning, as it is adequately managed through the NES and the proposed district plan. In terms of wastewater, Mr Trewartha has filed evidence for ECAN relating to potential impacts of groundwater from the proposed development. He considers that the groundwater and water bodies to be susceptible to adverse effect from discharges to land at the Paynes property and recommends further investigation and assessment. This position is based on assumptions regarding to the FDA 11 area from a desktop study that does not appear to have been ground truthed. As a result, he implies that it may not be possible for a development proposal in the area to obtain resource consent for on-site wastewater management from ECAN. I note this is a rezoning hearing, not a resource consent process, and that there's no development proposal currently before the Council for consideration. And I consider his evidence does not reflect the reality on the ground. Firstly, he states that there's currently no connection to reticulation for drinking water. This statement is incorrect, as FDA 11 is serviced by the Te Moana water supply and water is available as presented elsewhere in my evidence. He then states that one spring is mapped on the property and one spring mapped just outside the southwest corner of the property. Paynes have lived at the property since 1995 and are not aware of any springs on their property. They are aware of wet areas within neighbouring properties within FDA 11, particularly at 2 Main North Road, which then leads into the Raukapuka stream. It's not an unnamed spring-fed river as stated by Mr Trewartha. The submitted package provided to Mr Bonus included photos of extensive riparian planting that the Paynes have undertaken along the Raukapuka stream where it passes through the property, and we can bring those up. So this is some of the riparian planting that's been undertaken by the Paynes at this property.
Can I just note the previous slide is photos from 2003, subject to our previous resource consent subdivision application, and that's the stockwater race that was draining into the so-called spring-fed river. Our properties on the other side, but all of this degraded water was flowing into what is now designated spring-fed stream. So over time, we've seen an improvement, and that's what we've been trying to enhance where we have access to the stream boundaries.
So flick it onto the nice photos. And that's been, considerable energy of love exerted into that area. Mr Trewartha states that the depth of groundwater is mapped at less than 1 metre below ground surface and that a review of water level data within the property consistently indicates depths to water of less than 2 metres. The Paynes advise that they have a well on the property and they need to go to at least a depth of 3 metres to get to water. And then at paragraph 25, Mr Trewartha states that the nitrogen, the N concentrations in the area are less than 1 to 9 milligrams per litre, and the E. coli frequency concentrations have been detected between 5 to 25% of the time. 2014, the Paynes had testing undertaken on the well. The results showed a level of N at 0.36 grams per square metre, compared to the maximum acceptable value in the drinking water standards for New Zealand of 11.3 for this determinant. So obviously, clearly well below the MAV value. Therefore, there's no issue with N in the groundwater. There has been no nitrogen applied to the orchard property, so this is a result of what could be reasonably anticipated in such a scenario. And then, just as a by-side, under ECAN's plan change, it should be plan change 7, not plan change 6. This has made the nitrogen baseline for this property very low, and if you know anything about plan change 7, the nitrogen levels are set a baseline. And because of this very low baseline, it's now an inhibitor to changing to other rural land use where a higher nitrogen use would be needed. The E. coli level detected in the test results was less than 1, which is lower than the MAV. Therefore, there is no evidence of exceeding of drinking water standards parameters for E. coli. Given these findings, I consider that the evidence of Mr Trewartha could inaccurately lead the panel to believe that there are considerable problems with water and potential discharges within FDA 11 that could preclude obtaining a resource consent for on-site wastewater management discharges. Despite the severely limited time available to identify evidence to respond to these concerns, these findings conflict with the relevant material and we do not consider that to be reliable. In terms of consultation, Mr Bonus is obviously engaged with ECAN regarding the submissions to rezone FDA 11. Had the submitters been involved in such discussions, they would have had the opportunity to seek further advice rather than being caught by surprise in the discussions that were happening about the issues that had not been raised in ECAN's earlier submission. Mr Bonus is now suggesting that caucusing with TDC, ECAN and the submitters could take place. I do not consider that such caucusing is necessary, and I'm certain what outcome we could anticipate through such a process. The ability to discharge wastewater is provided for in the ECAN Land and Water Plan and requires a resource consent application. It is at that time that detailed discussions can take place and an appropriate design to be developed. To suggest a rezoning should not occur because of wastewater when ECAN has consented wastewater systems on neighbouring properties over many years is unreasonable. It preempts consideration of any future consent application and therefore is inconsistent with ECAN's plans and process. Therefore fails to preserve the natural justice rights of landowners to have their applications considered on a case-by-case basis in accordance with the relevant planning processes and rules that apply at that point in time when the consent application is made. Further, it's interesting to note that in December 2003, ECAN issued a resource consent to discharge on-site water 2023, to land at 69 Main North Road, Geraldine, and this property's 900 square metres, and it's on the opposite side of Main North Road from FDA 11 and backs onto the Waihi River.
One of the cluster down to the south of Main North Road.
And the Paynes understand that there were considerable constraints on the site. It was a replacement tank, so there was already existing house, but that a suitable solution was able to be developed subject to consent conditions. The system used is an advanced secondary treatment system with proprietary effluent filter and land applications into a sand trench and then applied to land through evaporation, transpiration drip lines. Such a system is a much more advanced technological solution than the traditional single-chamber septic tanks with a soak pick, and the new technology continues to be developed. This consent demonstrates that it's possible to obtain consent for an on-site wastewater management system on a small property near the FDA 11 area. And I consider that if ECAN and Mana Whenua are concerned about the impact of on-site wastewater management discharges in the Geraldine and Waihi River areas, then they could be advocating to TDC for reticulation for wastewater up Main North Road through the long-term plan process. As long-term, this would provide greater benefit than opposing the rezoning of FDA 11 to rural lifestyle. In terms of false expectations, Ms Francis considers that creating an immediate pathway for rezoning FDA 11 may create a false expectation of the ability to subdivide and get resource consent from the Regional Council for on-site wastewater management systems. TDC actually identified FDA as a future RLZ area, and in doing so, they created an expectation that the area was suitable for rural living. And Mr Bonis has identified that it's inappropriate to retain FDA 11 as GRUS, and the most appropriate alternative is rural lifestyle. There is always a risk for developers when undertaking development that expectations cannot be realised. This is a commercial risk that they accept, and the reasons developers undertake due diligence as part of the process. That is what the resource consent process is for. Ms Francis then suggests that if the rezoning recommendation is accepted, then a joint consent process with TDC and ECAN should be undertaken. Whether or not a joint process should occur should be considered at the point in time when a consent application is lodged, not during the rezoning process, and that's set out in the Act. I consider that would be preemptive to determine that such a process should occur without the benefit of being able to assess a resource consent application. Then just responding to a couple of matters that came through yesterday regarding rural lifestyle and community aspirations and the relationship of the NPSUD. And it's really important to recognise that rural lifestyle is a rural zone and it's not covered by the NPSUD, but there seems to be this suggesting that it's incompatible with a well-functioning urban environment, which is required by the MPSUD, and this interface creates a tension. Rural lifestyle is a choice that many in the community aspire to. It's recognised as an appropriate zone within the national planning standards and can coexist alongside urban living, recognising that each provides choice to suit people's different circumstances. Mr Heath suggested at the hearing yesterday that there is no connection between growth in primary production and the demand for urban housing. I consider this as inaccurate. Increase in rural productivity will lead to increase in demand for rural supply services and increased labour which flows through to rural towns such as Geraldine and Timaru. For instance, if farmers are buying more tractors and machinery, the local machinery distributors will increase staff to cater for a higher demand, which leads to an increase in urban population and demands for services such as schools. This is a direct flow on from primary production. Interestingly, Venture Timaru has recently come out with a report that says agriculture is a major influence on the economy in Timaru district, and I put the link to the hyperlink there. Therefore, I see the urban-rural issues as related, but do not consider that rural lifestyle should be limited due to a desire to enforce consolidation and infill development in towns when that is not the type of living environment that's sought by some people. Mr Bonis has suggested caucusing with ECAN regarding matters in the ECAN evidence, which I've spoken to, but I do wonder whether it would be beneficial to undertake caucusing with planners to address the inconsistencies and internal conflicts in the plan, such as the various provisions on-site wastewater management systems, and I've listed some of them there. But I think, we've identified that that's an issue that needs to be addressed. And so therefore, I seek provisions that will give effect to the RPS, not inconsistent with the Regional Land and Water Plan, and provide consistency within the proposed Timaru District Plan, and consider that such an approach will achieve sustainable management of natural and physical resources in the rural area of Timaru. And thank you. No. Can we take questions of me now, and then Mrs Payne will just make a final summary comment?
Great. Kia ora koutou. I have quite a few questions to get through. But first I have just trying to get a bigger picture. There's obviously been some rezoning applications under the Operative District Plan, because you've talked about that, but I wanted to know, given what Dr Payne has said about this process not being particularly helpful, has there been any rezoning applications under the Operative District Plan for the remainder, and if not, why not?
Not rezoning, there's been subdivision applications under the enable approach in the Operative District Plan. So the 4 dots that is identified on that map was a subdivision application. 5 dots, sorry.
Okay, but the remainder... Oh, yeah, sure.
Subdivided off that main road block, that consent was applied for in 2000 and finally resolved in 2003. When that was presented to council, it had to be presented as a productive unit, and that is why the boundary is where it is, and the site size, I think from memory, is 1.6 hectares. We were not aware of the enablement approach occurring. The boundary, the lots on Templar Street, 107 and 112, were a boundary adjustment, so it was a split of that property into 2 blocks. So the others, I'm sorry, I don't know quite what the years were that Mr Harper did those, but, the process evolved. As I think Mr Robertson has said in his statement to the commissioners for this hearing, he's on the corner of Bennett Road. If we'd been aware, we all would have progressed these processes. And his statement there for you is just explaining that under the present proposal, he is locked out because his block is only 3 hectares, so it wouldn't.
Okay, no,
help
that's
him.
really helpful context, thank you.
Sorry.
So also, in regards to the ECAN evidence, so I did ask some questions about that yesterday, and I also asked Mr. Bonas, and my understanding of the answer might be different than your understanding of the answer. But certainly what I had understood was that Mr. Bonas had actually had some sympathy with your particular submission and actively went out and sought the evidence that would enable us to make a decision. So it was specifically asked for this area to enable a consideration, is what I had understood the answer to be, and that we might have had a risk of not having all of the information had that not occurred.
That's possibly true, but actually in reality, the evidence that they presented was perhaps unhelpful, might be the best way of describing it.
Okay, thank you.
And certainly it was based on a lot of assumptions that on the ground aren't in reality, and that's our problem with what they've presented.
Can I just speak up with that as well? I also think that it's not a matter of ECAN having a position on this, it was the timing and the location of when we received it.
We need to traverse that. You've made your point very clear, and we'll take that into account.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so my other questions are about contamination, the water supply, wastewater, and then cultural values. So I think with contamination, you're mostly aligned with that. Mr. Massey confirmed yesterday that it's usually considered a subdivision stage, and that's what your evidence says as well.
You know, the national regulations exist. That's the bottom line.
So since there seems to be alignment there, I wanted now to talk about the water supply. And it was actually Mr. Kemp that I went back over my notes to check what I had understood his answer to be. So we had asked of him, like, what is the difference between going from the 2 hectares to a 1.5, going from a 6 to a 10 allotment? And my understanding of his answer was that the water supply may change because they have 2 different supplies for rural lifestyle and general residential. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, well, there's, I don't think we've put the map on here, but the water supply, Te Moana water supply goes along Bennett Road, and also the general Geraldine water supply is urban supply. And there's Dr. Payne and Mr. Kemp have had quite a dialogue, and there's some confusion around it. But the bottom line is that for the Payne property, they currently have 8 units of the Te Moana supply that they are paying for now, which is 1,000 litres a day for each of those units. And those units would then be able to be applied for any new lots that emanated. So without even looking at obtaining more water from Te Moana supply, there is water available for those lots.
Right.
And Mr. Kemp has actually confirmed that in an email to Dr. Payne. So, you know, we know that there is water supply available.
Right, okay, thank you.
The recent upgrade of the Te Moana scheme, a $3.4 million upgrade, which users such as ourselves are paying for, states on the council's website that it added 560 additional units, which the council are selling at $9,200 a unit. I don't think it's a problem in terms of the supply, the amount of water available. I think it perhaps is around capacity issues to parts of the district, but the 8 units that we are getting now gives certainty that we definitely have at least 8 units available. And to be clear, the water tests that we have available to us were taken because at that time we were using bore water for our food, for our processing, and we couldn't guarantee potability of that, which is why we put in a lot of extra storage for Te Moana water, so that we can use that through our food processing and guarantee it's potable. So it is meeting drinking water standards. And the other thing is we can irrigate with it if needed, or if our bore is compromised. So it's not that we're sitting on water units with this in mind. We do use them in a dry year.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you.
that's helpful, thank you.
Right, okay.
Thank you. My next questions are around the wastewater and which seems to be, so the wastewater and the mana whenua, or the cultural values, seem to be the issues that are the most sticking points. So I wanted just to get a better understanding of why in your view you're a professional planner, so in your view as a professional planner, how confident are you that the new lots and the separation distances and the discharge conditions required under the land and water plan would be achievable, and what happens in the event that it's not?
Well, the mapping that's been done on potential lot sizes has taken that into account to ensure that there would be sufficient area for an on-site wastewater management system without reticulation. So that's been undertaken by a surveyor who's considered what would 1.44 hectares look like. So I'm relying on the assessment, that the surveying work in that plan.
Right, so they would do the assessment to meet the requirements.
Yeah.
And the other issue that we canvassed was the need that the waste would have to be transported, that Geraldine has no capacity to actually manage that. It would have to be transported to Timaru. Is that your understanding?
Well, that is, if the consent could not be granted, one option would be that. But the other options exist, like you can actually, if you're building a new house, you could plumb black water and grey water separately, because it's the grey water that adds the quantity of water to a system. And if you can actually manage them differently, then that's an option. That's more expensive, but there are options available. And as I say, the new multi-chamber septic tank, I don't know how much you know about septic tanks, but the new multi-chamber systems, the water that's actually coming out of them is actually really clear, and it's generally like in the one at 69 Main North Road, discharged to land through evapotranspiration rather than soakage, which is the old system. So there's all these technological changes around on-site wastewater management that can address solutions. I've personally put in a septic tank system on a 5,000 square metre system, 5,000 square metres section in the last 12 months, and I've been through the rigours of it all, so I have some personal experience, and that was quite a constrained site.
Yeah, no, and I've done similar
Yeah.
long ago. So then I wanted to, now I'm relating the cultural values that have been shared to the wastewater or the water, and so we have been, it's been shared by mana whenua that these are culturally significant waterways, and I wanted to know whether it would be appropriate for zoning to, rezoning to go ahead at this point when we're not certain whether or not wastewater can be safely managed, and I think that comes to the point of what the ECAN evidence was raising, that there could be an issue.
As far as I'm concerned, it's not the rezoning can occur, whether the subdivision that could be provided for through this rezoning is therefore subject to those constraints. I don't think there's no reason why rezoning should not occur, and as Mr Bonner said yesterday, he has a great level of discomfort retaining this land as general rural because it just does not fit. And so you're in a situation of, well, what do you do with this? It's not general rural. Yes, there might be some constraints regarding rural lifestyle, but what are the other options?
Yeah. And I am going to just ask some questions on your summary statement, but before I do, I just wanted to go back to your original evidence.
Yes.
And at paragraph 9.6, you point out that Mana Whenua did not lodge a submission, and I wanted to understand, like, what is the relevance of that in your planning evidence, and then how does that line up with the requirements under the RMA and for us as decision makers to take cultural values into account?
Well, I think I was surprised at getting that report attached to Mr Bonner, so I suppose that was... But what I've identified is that through the subdivision hearing, Mr Boys has recommended that kaitahu values are added as a matter of discretion for subdivision, and it's also addressed as a matter under the ECAN land and water plan if you're applying for a wastewater consent, that kaitahu values are to be assessed. So I believe, or consider that those values, I'm not dismissing them, but I'm saying here's the appropriate forum where they will be considered.
Okay, yep, okay. I do accept that. I accepted that was probably what you were intending to say, rather than to say they haven't submitted, so...
Well, it was just a bit of a surprise to get that report. And what I've said today is that unfortunately, Ms Hall has put FDA 3 and FDA 11 together jointly in her assessment, and they've obviously quite different effects, so, yeah.
Well, that was going to be my very next question, which is your evidence today, which is 2.23 to 2.25. And there's an assumption made that they are actually different effects, whereas my read of the cultural values is that actually they were talking about cumulative effects, and really that they were appropriate to be combined and considered together. And I just wanted to know, from your perspective, what is the inherently different cultural value that is actually makes the point of difference?
It wasn't, it was an inherently different type of subdivision effect, not an inherently different cultural value. That's what I mean by that. So you're talking about a residential subdivision with maybe 130 lots, and you're comparing it with one with over a much bigger area with 6 or 10 lots. And I thought the comparison between the two, I would have preferred to have seen them dealt separately in Ms Hall's report.
That could have potentially made it clearer, because
yes,
from my read it was maybe we're taking different interpretations of what the cultural values are, and therefore what the effect is, because my understanding was that it was the spring-fed stream impacting on the waterway, the river eventually, and the cumulative effects that could impact on Mahinga Kai. So I hadn't seen them as separate, but you're seeing them as...
And to be fair, any further development in this FDA 11 area gives greater scope for further esplanade reserves and plantings along that stream to enhance those Mahinga Kai values. Thank you. And I only have the one last question on the cultural values, and it's because you've raised it. At 3.56, you talk about if Mana Whenua are concerned about wastewater, that they should actually come here and lobby. And I just wanted to know, so what is the point of that statement? Is it to say, therefore, they shouldn't be commenting on your stuff? No, but what I'm really saying is, if you look at, take the whole area, you know, ideally, there should be a wastewater pipe up Main North Road, given the number of septic tanks up the road. And if they are really concerned about Waihi River, which over a lot of those lots back onto, then long-term a solution is for the whole area, not just for FDA 11, but for the whole area and cultural values, extending that reticulation would be appropriate. And it may be with the if the Scots development goes ahead and the wastewater pipe gets extended, then there may be opportunities to extend that wastewater reticulation, which would be beneficial for cultural values.
Okay, sure. Thank you. They are my questions.
Ms Wolf, I just had some questions for you just around the housing availability and land supply report that you co-authored.
Yes.
And these, I just want to make it clear, these questions are directed just to you at this point, and then I may have some questions for Dr Payne as well. But these are for you, and you'll appreciate the context of my questions. And I'm needing to consider what weight we give to that report. And you were co-authored, but you co-authored with Dr Payne, who has obviously a familial relationship to the land and the matter that is before us. And we don't know, but potentially financial interest in the outcome of the submission. So I'm on notice but we do need to interrogate the integrity of the conclusions. And I firstly wanted to understand your role as a co-author in the report and what parts of the report are attributed to your professional independent opinion and those parts of the report that relate to Dr Payne's input.
So I was involved with the survey design, but not actually undertaking the survey. And then in terms of section 4.4, in terms of looking at the planning documents of relevance and contributing to the conclusions.
Thank you. In terms of the survey design, I see there is reference to the questions that were asked, but what was the documentation that supported the questionnaire? Can we be confident that participants understood what you meant by rural lifestyle, for example, what they meant by residential land? Was there some information provided to them, or were participants left to make up their own mind as to whether they in fact understood the questions?
As I understand it, there was some information that supported the questionnaire that would have made that clear.
Provide that information to the panel?
We could do.
Thank you. Also, you note in the report that it was peer-reviewed, but for reasons you've described, the peer reviewers were wishing to be anonymous. I simply don't understand that. How can we take into account that the document has been rigorously peer-reviewed if those peer-reviewing are not prepared to put their names to such peer review?
That's a valid comment, but could I defer that to Dr Payne, who arranged the peer review?
Thank you.
No, just wait till she's got the question. Do you want Dr Payne?
Useful for him to explain that.
Sure. So I approached the peer reviewers, one at University of Otago and one with planning consultant, and I'm sure they would be prepared to put their name to it if I put them to it. It was a cursory mark in terms of would you like to be attributed as a peer reviewer, and they said given the kind of critical nature of the report they would prefer to remain anonymous, but I'm sure they would be prepared to back it.
It's important, and it's as much for your own integrity, Dr Payne. The panel's not at all suggesting that you've done anything wrong, and I wouldn't expect that you would have, but you have to appreciate that you are putting this report to us as something that we should seriously consider in the context of Geraldine, and I think for transparency and integrity that those peer reviews should be made available to the panel.
Would you mind if I approached the peer reviewers and requested it of them? And then
Look, we don't know who they are, so you're going to have to negotiate with them, but it would assist us in ensuring that, that we can attribute some weight to the report. It's an interesting document and raises some interesting issues about how we deal with the numbers around sufficiency and capacity versus identified need, particularly even in the context of the NPSUD in terms of policy 1 if we're looking at urban rezoning, and ensuring that, you know, that land availability meets the need where it exists. So it is important to us, so I would invite you to do that.
Certainly.
And could I just comment, we were very aware that Dr Payne obviously has an interest in this property, but the report was seen as being wider for Geraldine, not specific to just FDA 11. And so from that point of view, and it was something that Geraldine NZ really wanted to be undertaken because they are concerned as a community about the impacts of planning decisions on their community.
We need to just make sure that we have the ability to give it the weight that you're asking us to.
Thank you.
Just in terms of the responses to the surveys, I didn't see, and I may have missed it, was there any input from any real estate agencies or property management organisations that could speak to the availability of rental accommodation or external interest in accommodation in Geraldine? Can you point me to that if it's in the report?
So the report was undertaken in quite a participant-agnostic way. We kept it very broad. Some people noted what industry they were, and some of the responses did come from real estate professionals. Subsequently, there's a letter from LJ Hooker in Geraldine and also Harcourt's talking about land availability and the constraints they're under in terms of land sections and lots and that sort of thing. And also the statements provided where one of them was a builder and that sort of thing for our previous evidence. So yeah, this was going to be attached to our current
Yeah, so it hasn't been attached, but we can give you this letter from LJ Hooker which describes current situation if that would be useful for you.
Happy for you to table it as to what weight we can give it.
Yes.
We'll reflect on that, but yes, if you
that-
can provide that, that's fine. Just, they were my questions about the report.
So, Ms Wolfe, I'm going to go to a very detailed question. Your support for the inclusion of the 1.5 hectares for the lots that do not access Main North Road or State Highway 79, I simply want to know what mechanism you think should be utilised to achieve that. Is it a notation on a plan? Is it a rule, or have I missed it?
Oh, right. No, well, Mr Bonis has recommended a special control area, and what I'm suggesting is that the special control area still applies, but it's 1.5 hectares rather than the 2 hectares. But he does say whether, we had a discussion about it yesterday, whether in fact there would also need to be an SCA for the remainder of the area that does front Main North Road, to say that that's an SCA of 2 hectares. Now, that's something we might need to have a little bit more discussion about.
Okay, so in particular then, I was looking at the part with the lots that don't access Main North Road.
Yeah.
Can that just be addressed as a notation to the special control area, or is there a provision that needs to apply to
I would have thought a notation to the special control area would be sufficient.
Thank you for that. And then I'm now going to go bigger picture again, and I've just got just your question, your summary statement around the National Policy Statement for Urban Development and it not applying. I thought you would provide me with a good opportunity to ask a question.
I may regret.
And I think in particular it's relating to what the duty of this panel is relative to those higher order documents and giving effect, and is your understanding our duty is to give effect to those? Right. And so, as I understand your evidence, and I'm just going to summarise it, and I just want to check my understanding, is that in terms of the NPS urban development, that doesn't apply to this land anyway, because it's not urban. And then, is your understanding that the only urban area within this district is what would be required to give effect to relates to Timaru?
That's correct.
Okay. So then I want to drill down to the next thing, so that so there's no duty other than in Timaru, in your view, that we give effect to this?
That's correct, but the Section 42A and other reports have taken the principles of a well-functioning urban environment and applied them, even though the MPSUD doesn't apply.
Right. And I guess then, in part of that, going to the next step, is then the regional policy statement does have more matters rather than capacity. My understanding of all the things as it relates to the form and nature. Is that your understanding?
Yes, and the limited rural residential, policy 531, which I addressed in my evidence on the subdivision chapter in quite some extent. So I haven't replicated that evidence again here.
No, I appreciate that. I just wanted to confirm.
Yes,
your
but I am,
views.
and very cognizant of that, because you do have to give effect to the RPS, and we consider that this would meet the RPS requirements. Interestingly, the RPS talks about rural residential up to 2 hectares. So, a 1.5 hectare lot would come within the parameters of what's suggested in the discussion in the RPS.
Right. And then, is your understanding that the regional, apart from that bit about the limited, it doesn't seek a cap on the amount of development that that is to be provided around a district or through a zone?
No, it doesn't provide a cap, but it's very clear that it needs to be attached to a urban area. So there's some parameters around it. The decision about how much is provided for in the district is something that the district has to consider.
Right. And they're not relevant because it was identified as a future control area because of the national policy statement I'm hoping I'm waving the right one around, of highly productive land, is that that's one that does limit around capacity. Is it your understanding that's one that does have limitations around capacity matters?
Yes.
Right, and that isn't of any relevance here.
But of course we've had the assessment done by Stuart Ford in respect of the Paynes property, which Mr Bonnet has applied across the whole FDA 11 area.
Yes, good. So that's fine. I just wanted to, so in terms of giving effect to, I understand your evidence very clearly that there are no impediments.
Yes, that's correct.
Relative to that. So I just wanted to basically work it through with you to make sure I was clear. Thank you for that.
I must admit, in writing my evidence, I probably should have actually enunciated some of those things clearer, but the head wasn't quite there, so apologies for that.
I think that brings us to the end of your presentation, barring any final comments that Mrs Payne would like to make.
Mrs Payne would like to make just some final comments.
Thank you.
You'll have to forgive me if I don't make much sense here. I'm well known as a night owl, but 2:30 a.m. for doing this last night even exceeded stupid o'clock for me. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Peelview Orchard has been a commercial orchard since 1928. Next month it will be 30 years since my husband and I took over its ownership. Over the course of those 30 years, we have faced our share of challenges, those thrown at us by weather, including late frosts, vicious hailstorms, gale force winds, and seasons like the last one with never-ending rain. But growers by nature are perpetual optimists. The next season will always be better. The world we operate in, though, has also changed greatly, with massive industry and market changes to adapt to. But society's expectations of farmers and growers have also changed. Lots has been written about the rural-urban divide. During the time of COVID, business was told that they would need to pivot. In truth, in our 30 years orcharding, we've performed more pivots than a ballerina. But the reality is that there just are no more pivots that we can perform with our growing operation. As Stuart Ford has modelled with his HPL assessment, there is nothing productive we can do with the property that doesn't require additional cash support. It was a phone call, though, that I received at 9:30 a.m. on the 24th of February this year from the Compliance Officer, Resource Management and Bylaws at the Timaru District Council, advising me that he had received 2 complaints from 2 different neighbours over the preceding weekend in relation to the use of our bird scarer to protect our crop, that confirmed for me that I just don't have the emotional resilience to grow another crop. It brought into stark relief that our needs as a horticultural business are just not compatible with those of our neighbours. The season we have just completed will sadly be the last for Peelview Orchard. The removal of the remaining trees is underway, which is sad as we've nurtured them for so long. But it is the only decision we can make. Obviously, this decision sees us foregoing income as well, and this will make things more challenging for us, but we will manage, as we always have. Despite our resilience to all the challenges we've faced over the years, the district plan review process has been particularly gruelling. Back in 2020, TDC asked for feedbacks from residents on the draft plan, which was provided. When the plan was notified and was totally different to what we'd seen previously, we submitted. Naively, I viewed this, as did Mrs. Callaghan, Mr. Robertson and Mr. Harper, as leading to the correction of what we viewed as an illogical, unreasonable and frankly indefensible zoning for the area. And I want to acknowledge the statements provided by Mr. Harper and Mr. Robertson, who still remain interested parties to this hearing. So why is it that our property has been used as the proxy for the entire Main North Road, Templar Street and Bennett Road area? The process has caused us significant stress and unfortunately cost that we can ill afford. We totally agree with submitter Mrs. Lee Burden's comments about the inaccessibility of planning processes. Reflecting back 5 years ago, knowing what I know now, would I engage in this process? It's an entirely rhetorical question because we are at this point now. But if council is genuine in wishing to engage genuinely with its community, I do think it needs to reflect on this plan's development and how it can make improvements. Our hope is that the commissioners will recognise the changes that have already occurred all around us and will appreciate the real-world impacts this has had on us as it considers its recommendations of Mr. Bonis, also reflecting across the inconsistencies in the plan in the various chapters as Ms. Wharf has raised in her evidence. We consider we have been good custodians of the property over all these years. We treasure it as our whenua. We've put in significant work to improve the water quality through initiatives like the significant riparian planting. We want to see sympathetic development here that maintains the environment and specialness of this place and responds to the contours of the land and its natural features and the established trees, etc., rather than an unsympathetic development due to some highly restrictive lot size rule. We want council to reserve sufficient flexibility within its planning framework to ensure that the precious resource of this land can be used efficiently, but also become a place for other families to live and grow as part of a thriving Geraldine community. I'm sorry. And as my final note about family, I want to acknowledge our 2 children, Ben and Olivia, here today. They have accompanied us on this 30-year journey. They grew up with parents who were often not particularly present for them and were also frequently pretty stressed and this certainly has shaped them. Despite this, they've grown into impressive, highly accomplished, but also hugely empathetic young people, and David and I could not be more proud of them. Now that we've done all of this and left everything we feel we can on the table here for the commissioners to process and review, I look forward to giving my attention to helping my daughter here organise her wedding in November. So thank you, Commissioners, for your time.
Thank you, and we acknowledge the deeply personal issues this process has raised for you, and thank you very much for your constructive way that you've engaged in the process and bringing evidence to the panel. So thank you, and thank you, Ms. Wolfe.
Just one question. If you do a site visit, yes, normally site visits, the landowners can't be with you, or who would you have with you?
Look, it's not our intention to go onto any properties. We do have a scheduled site visit for Geraldine tomorrow, and we will be visiting the locality. We've done earlier site visits to Geraldine, so we're familiar as to where the property is, but we'll make our own way, and if that position changes, we'll get in touch with you, Ms. Wolfe, in the first instance. Thank you.
And that's fine, because we could arrange for someone to take you over the property who's independent of me.
No, that's not necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Vela, just to return to some more administrative matters, just a bit of we have kept a record of our questions, or thankfully Ms. Thorne has been online remotely, and hopefully she still is, and has also been taking some notes. So we'll do the usual process in terms of a post-hearing minute, but just to check in with you about this hearing, but then also we just had a couple of things in preparation for the next day. Yeah.
So in terms of this hearing, do you want me to recite back to you the questions that I've got on my list, or I can liaise with Ms.
I think
Thorne?
you can liaise with Ms. Thorne and provide your list to her, and we'll build from there. Thank you.
I think in that case, the main question for me out of this hearing is the timing for a reply. At the moment, in terms of minute 38, that reply is due on the 4th of August alongside alongside all the other final replies and the hearing H. And so I'm just conscious that, you still yet have to issue a minute. Our technical experts that you've seen are sort of ready to update their summaries that we've said, not their summaries, sorry, their responses to the evidence that they sort of prepared speaking notes on. So that kind of process can happen sort of reasonably quickly, but I guess it's a question of what other questions you might have. I know, so I can't remember who now, mentioned that there'll be, you've hit the high level ones, but there might be some more detailed questions that need to be responded to, so.
Yeah, look, we'll reflect on that, and we'll work quite quickly to get a minute out. I'm keen to get, Mr. Bonis is not involved in the next stages, and your technical experts are ready to go. I think the sooner we have those replies, the better, so I'm keen to stick to that August 6th.
Okay.
But if there are sort of legal issues or matters, I'm happy to give you a bit more leeway and perhaps roll those in to the final reply, rather than having sort of two bites of the cherry, if that's helpful.
Sorry, so my understanding is that all final replies, so ordinarily, obviously, Mr. Bonis would have the opportunity to do an interim reply and a final reply, but given that we're now into final replies for the 4th of August, I imagine that this would simply be one, he'd just have one opportunity for that, which seems to make sense.
Yeah, that I hadn't thought about that, but that makes a huge amount of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of if you've got legal questions for me, you're suggesting that maybe there might be some more time to do that, I suppose, is what you're saying. Right. Okay. I guess the only other thing that I just mention is, just
a quick question.
Think in my head, some of your responses though might be contingent on the other.
Which is what I was about to say.
Okay,
too.
great.
Yeah. Sorry. Not the other 42A replies.
Just thinking about if the subdivision,
Yes.
section 42A changes,
Yes.
his or her
But
recommendation.
we can work together on that. I think we should proceed on the basis that we'll just do it by the 4th of August. Mr. Willis will work with Mr. Bonis around that, and we'll identify whether there are any other linkages too. And if there becomes an issue, then we can come back to you to see whether we need an extension of time.
That's right. And the same, it's not just Mr. Bonis, but for financial contributions and designations, just make them final replies.
Yes, of course. Yeah. The only thing I did want to just raise for you, the council doesn't take a position on this, but I know that there's a couple of 32A analyses that might be coming in, and I don't know whether panel's sitting on the further evidence on MPS-HPL that's been, there's been a request for an opportunity to provide that. But if you wanted Mr. Bonis to comment or have the opportunity to update recommendations as a result, you just need to think about the timing of that.
We will just wait and see what comes in.
Okay.
And if we've got questions, we'll ask them. But I wasn't anticipating another round necessary.
Sure.
You've put your position. And I'm not going to be inviting new evidence. I'm just simply wanting those planners to carry out an evaluation based on what's in front of us.
Okay. So that's all I have for this hearing, unless you've got anything further. Okay. The other thing I thought I'd just check in on is just to let you know that the flood assessment overlay notification is on track for notification on the 17th of July. So that timetable that we've put together is still appropriate. And then the only other thing is that we have Mr. Caswell here, who is the GIS operator. And so just in terms of that mapping comparison tool that you've requested, if you've got any questions about, or perhaps Mr. Caswell can let us know what can actually be done.
I think that was the point, as what we don't want to be asking for something that's just not practical.
Yep.
So come forward and tell us what you can do, and then we'll let you know whether that meets. Yeah.
Yes, the planners, our planning team have done a bit of research on what they prefer and what other councils have offered, and we've chosen a model where we'll use a swipe tool between the proposed district plan and the revised district plan. So you better swipe between the two halves of the screen, as it were, and hopefully Megan's able to share this with us. We've spun up a bit of a sample to demonstrate what could be done. Here we go.
So what's this? I need to.
So this stage, oh goodness, that's going to be noisy.
told by Maddie behind you, put your microphone.
Apologies. Is it required for public viewing or just a specific subscription model as such?
Just for us initially, but I guess once our decisions are released, then I guess it's up to the council as to whether it wants to use the same tool to show the outcomes of our report versus what was notified, and whether that's useful as a public-facing tool.
Cool. In that case, we'll have to sign you up to a subscription, as it were, so I'll need a list of names and email addresses for users, if I can, please.
It can be arranged.
Can you muck it up?
Well, no, you can't make it up. It is a website. There's nothing to be scared of. The other
Add my name to that, or just sit next to Jane.
The other option for simplicity is we don't protect it with a security login as such, but we don't publicise the URL. So you'd take someone quite clever to discover the URL. It technically is public, but unless we shared the link to the site, you won't discover it. So perhaps we'll run with that model, and then you've got the flexibility to include others if need be.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for organising that.
You're welcome. I think that's all I've got. We were just rolling into hearing H. We need to make some arrangements for the Mana Whenua viewing as well. And notification is, as I said, ready to go.
All right. I don't think we need to address any of that today. We'll have some further discussions about that, and if we've got anything, we'll issue a minute to clarify that. Right, we'll close with a karakia. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Kia tau ngā manaakitanga a te naru ki runga ki tina o tātou, kia mahia te kua, makeheke, kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te araha, toi te reo Māori, kia tūturu ka whakamaua, kia teina, haumie, huie, tākie.
Okay. Thank you.